free to start. Thanks so much again for inviting me here today. This presentation will be focused on equity, diversity, inclusion tools for transforming STEM research and practices. And so I'm going to talk a lot about the different work that I've done, and I want to start first by acknowledging that the work that I've been doing with my team at Carleton is located on the traditional unceded territories of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Miigwech to the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people for their stewardship of this territory and the teachings that come from it. And in my research, I'm committed to weaving connections to Indigenous knowledge and perspectives, and I continue to external my own internal biases, especially when I'm doing this type of work. And unlearning is part of that process too. So, just being committed to being a better ally in the process. So, a little bit about me. I completed my PhD at the University of Ottawa in Ottawa, Canada, and I completed it specifically in chemistry education research, which is a subfield of chemistry. But this is where I did, you know, I've did a project on systems thinking, which you're going to learn a bit about today. And that kind of led me to be more ingrained within the green chemistry and sustainability community. So I'm also af after graduating from my PhD, I am now a chief moderator on the green chemistry and teaching and learning community with Beyond Benign, which I love, and continuing to explore different things in that and supporting educators. Um, and then alongside this part-time job, I'm full-time job as a postdoctoral researcher at Carleton University, completing equity, diversity, and inclusion research in STEM, which is where a lot of my research, educational research background is come into play into this thing. So you'll see a lot of what I'm presenting today, like they kind of intertwine, and I think that's what makes the this work so exciting for me and yeah. So the goals of today's seminar, I'm going to first explore, we're going to explore an EDI tool that's being developed. And this is the current work that we are doing at Carleton University, where we're aiming to measure EDI readiness in STEM. Then we're going to explore some tools that are accessible to you right now. These are tools for addressing EDI in STEM research and teaching more broadly, as well as tools for addressing EDI at each stage of the research process. And this is kind of informed from the framework of NSERC, which is like the Canadian platform, government funding agency for research. And so um, anyone that submits grants to the Canadian government has to kind of go through this process. And so I'm tailoring specific tools for each of these principles. And then I'm going to have a little activity at the end to reflect on your personal EDI goals. So why is EDI important um, at all? Well, and I'm going to throughout the rest of this presentation, I'm just going to refer EDI to as equity, diversity, inclusion. Okay, so the reason is because the challenges to EDI in STEM influence everything about science. This includes who engages in science and participates, as well as their experiences, who sets the research agendas, who benefits from the actual science, how STEM activities occur, their success, and their applicability to society. And those who participate in science not only affect the design practice and scientific outcomes, it also affects the public trust in science and the effective translation of science to society and policy. And so increased representation increased representation within the overall science system is central for improving science and societal benefits. So there has been, given that I've just recently done a systematic lit review in this domain, there's been many initiatives that have tried to, advance EDI in STEM. But the measurable progress remains limited, and the current interventions are not sustainable. For example, many interventions place burden of change on the underrepresented groups. There's very minimal that have longitudinal evaluations of the outcomes, and of the outcomes measured, behavioral change is not very commonly measured, which is a problem because EDI is twofold, about awareness, but also about behaviors and taking action to do certain things to advance it so that more people can embed you know, the principles of EDI. And and so there's a need to design interventions that support structural change without inadvertently creating reliance on interventions. And so that is where the Edit STEM team, and this is the team that I'm part of at Carleton University. Edit STEM stands for an EDI transformation for STEM. And I will just briefly say that there's 10 different faculty members from two different Canadian institutions on this project. Recently, the team has received a big NSERC Alliance grant to fund this project over 5 years, which is phenomenal, and it means that we can really branch out and expand this research. But what our goal is or mission is to design, develop, and evaluate a technological platform to encourage changes in human behavior to advance EDI and STEM. And so, what I'm sharing with you all today is only just one part of this overall project, but is a foundational part of being able to develop this so-called platform that is in very early stages. So, at the core of our research, we are using this trans-theoretical model of behavioral change to that it helps to understand um, key stages of readiness for enacting change in anything. So previously, this model has been used in like addictions research, so more on the health side of things, but more recently has been applied to equity, diversity, and inclusion. And there's 5 stages of change that a person can move through. So let's say we use the EDI context as the of if we want to instigate change through the different stages. So in a pre-contemplation stage, it means that somebody might not understand or is not aware of the harm of not including EDI. So maybe they don't understand the importance of EDI, and therefore they do not want to do anything about it. Like they're not willing to take any action. Contemplation is where they might be aware now of the importance of integrating EDI and STEM, but are hesitant to implement take any action. Preparation is I'm aware of the why it's important. And now I'm gonna prepare I'm planning to take action in some way. And then action is actually doing the positive behaviors, and maintenance is maintaining that behavior over time. And what's important here, you can see there's one other stage here. It's not well represented in this circular figure here, but relapse is it can happen at any point. It could happen, meaning like it's an event that could happen at any point in time that may um, prompt or may lead to a person going back down to a lower stage of change. For example, pre-contemplation or contemplation. If like, for example, seeing something on the news or having an encounter with somebody who is, saying why they don't think it's important, and it changes their belief system. So this is the model we use, and in addition to the stages of change, there's these 10 processes of change, which are mechanisms that help people move forward through the stages of change and can inform the design of interventions. So one process of change is consciousness raising, and this could be activities that involve sharing stories or data about like the evidence of the gaps in gender in STEM or personal stories of how it's influenced challenges that underrepresented individuals have faced or the benefits, research on the benefits of diversity in STEM. And so by engaging people in those activities, the aim is to move them from pre-contemplation into contemplation stage, etc. So as foundational work for the Edit STEM initiative, our research thus far has focused on developing and evaluating a novel assessment tool. So this is part one. This is the tool in development that I'm talking about, that we hope that it will be readily accessible after we conduct our studies on it. But we it's called the EDI-Ready Questionnaire, and we created this to measure individuals' readiness across different career stages. So graduate, faculty, we're hoping eventually industry people working in industry as well. And this need to create this tool comes from this major research gap by there's little to no work or tools that actually enable measurement of progressing in advancing EDI at the individual or institutional level. And so this questionnaire is grounded in the TTM model. And we aim to quantify individuals' attitudes and behaviors associated with EDI initiatives. And the impact of this is really to measure actions to advance EDI with time. Um, so, if different tools or different interventions are conducted, we can use this tool to measure how that impacts individuals over time, as well as inform the design of tailored theory-driven interventions, including interactive technologies. So I'll just tell you a little bit about how this questionnaire was developed, and I want to emphasize that the work that I'm sharing with the development of the questionnaire was predominantly done by a master's student in neuroscience, Candace Harris, who I have a picture of the top here. And what she did with the team of the Edit STEM team was create these Likert scale items, so from strongly disagree to strongly agree, that were developed informed by other scales addressing racism, discrimination, and gender bias in academia. These items, when I say items, they also mean questions. These questions were then grouped based off of the attitudes and behaviors aligned with the stages of change specific to EDI and STEM. And they were also tailored to different groups. So graduate students have their actions and behaviors maybe look different than faculty members. And so we wanted to make sure we captured that. So here's just a few example questions that we embedded within the EDI-Ready questionnaire, a lot that tie with each state of change. So for a pre-contemplation question, the item that they would be asked to respond from strongly agree to strongly disagree is individuals from all gender identities have equal opportunities in STEM academia. And so if somebody chose strongly agree, it might suggest that they might not be aware that there isn't equal, generally not equal opportunities in all STEM disciplines. Contemplation, focusing on EDI best practices has a positive impact for academic or scientific communities. And so for somebody who would be in contemplation, would say strongly agree, because it does have a positive impact. It means that they recognize the value of EDI. For preparation, this is where we had to tailor questions a bit differently. Technically, all graduate student questions were applicable to faculty as well, which is why I say all. For all, I plan to integrate EDI into academic contributions such as coursework, research, teaching materials, presentations, or publications. But faculty only, um, an item that was specific for faculty would be I am planning to support or increase diversity in team composition through collaboration, recruitment, mentorship, or outreach. Generally, graduate students don't have the capacity to be involved in team or don't, they're not, that's not something that they typically deal with. For action, one of the items could be I have attended workshops or seminars on EDI, like all of you right now. And then faculty only could be I actively seek out and include individuals from underrepresented groups when recruiting for academic teams, research projects, or collaborations. So that just gives you a sense of what these questions were like in the questionnaire. And so our study aims to investigate to what extent does a behavioral change scale, that questionnaire, reliably measure STEM academic professionals' readiness to engage with EDI initiatives. And because when we develop a new skill, we want to make sure that we have valid responses. It produces valid responses, and so therefore, that the follow-up question to this was, to what extent do participants' questionnaire responses align with their interview responses? And then their second research question is, how effectively does the scale capture attitudes, barriers, and facilitators associated with progressing through the stages of change? So we recently completed phase one of this study at Carleton University, and this involved the scale development, which I just walked through. With any research that you conduct with human participants, you need ethics board approval, so that was necessary. We piloted the questionnaire with a few students and faculty before disseminating it wide scale. And we recruited faculty, graduate students, and postdocs in the Faculty of Science and Faculty of Engineering and Design. And we were able to have 255 responses at the end of our recruitment period. Pre-screening questionnaire is the first thing that they engaged with. It was just to make sure it's basically if you were eligible for the study. In this case, because Carleton University has other faculties as well, we were just interested in faculty members and students in the Faculty of Science and Engineering. Once they were eligible, they were given informed consent as well as a demographic questionnaire along with the EDI readiness scale or questionnaire. And then I conducted follow-up interviews with a subset of those individuals to better understand their experiences, perspectives, and attitudes towards EDI in STEM. And so the analysis that I have conducted from these results were a principal component analysis, which was really part of the validity, collecting validity evidence. proof of concept for that we in fact measured for the stages of change aligned with the trans-theoretical model. And this is principal component analysis really looks for variables that correlate highly with other groups of variables. And when I say variables, these are the individual questions that were part of the EDI readiness questionnaire. And so um, conducting this statistical analysis allows them the questions to be grouped under and without having the model given to it we were looking to see that the questions actually grouped aligned with the stages of change, which they did, which was part of the proof of concept. And by doing this as well, we reduce the number of questions in the questionnaire to ones that correlated highly with each other. The second part of this analysis was these chi-square tests and multinomial logistic regressions, which were basically the experimental analyses of the data. So basically after the principal component analysis, once we reduced the number of questions, we could then identify a score for each participant for each stage of change. And then the stage of change score that was the highest was their assigned stage of change. And then we looked at the relationship between that stage of change assigned and the independent demographic variables, such as their faculty role, age, gender, sex, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, disability, years since degree, highest degree, and first generation, which are all variables that are important for doing EDI work. So I'll just briefly touch on the principal component analysis. So there was three that we conducted. The reason being that we had graduate student questions, we had faculty questions, and then questions that were both applicable to graduate and faculty. So by doing the first principal component analysis, this led to the creation of an EDI readiness graduate student specific survey. This went from 60 questions down to 32 questions. And again, we saw that the stages of change were represented from the PCA. The second one being the combined data, graduate student and faculty. This created the EDI Readiness General Academia Survey. And this went from 59 questions to 32 questions. And again, we saw the stages of change represented. And then the last one being faculty only data. You could see there was a lot more questions for faculty just because of the action questions are much larger due to their ability to do different things in academia. And this went down to 35 questions. So, like I said before, once we had these revised questionnaires or reduced questions in the questionnaire, each participant got a score for each stage of change based off of whether you were a faculty or a graduate student, and this was the what we found. We based off of how participants what their highest score was and then therefore what stage of changes they were grouped into. So of the 255 participants, we see that the majority of faculty and graduate students and postdocs are in the preparation stage of change, which was really nice to see, given that, there are different perspectives on, social media. And yet, the other thing that I will mention is that it is possible that our sample is biased based off of those who already have positive views on EDI. Those participants might have been more inclined to participate in a study like this. So that's something to look into for the future of how we can better target all perspectives of EDI. And so now that we had these categories of participants, we then looked at the chi-square test and multinomial logistic regressions of the different variables. And what we found was gender was the stages of change were significantly different based off of gender. And I will note that we did have a bunch of other genders present in our questionnaire. But due to the statistical analyses, we needed to group these into one category, gender diverse, in order to have enough power. And so what we see is we can see that women are generally more um, you know, geared to the right side of the plot than men. And then gender diverse also more geared to the right. And the logistic regressions show that when we have pre-contemplation as our variable that we're comparing things to, as well as women, men are about 84% less likely to be in preparation than contemplation compared to women. And then as well, men are about 78% less likely to be in action than pre-contemplation compared to women. And this aligns with some of the findings in the literature, but um, we did also have slightly larger sample of women than men in our study. And the same thing was um, the variable on sex. So stages of change were significantly different based on sex. We did have another option for intersex, but again, we needed to remove this from their analyses due to limited responses. And so what we see is that females, again, are higher, like more skewed to the right-hand side than males. And the multinomial regression shows that females are about 6 times more likely to be in preparation compared to than pre-contemplation compared to males, as well as females being 5 times, about 5 times more likely to be in action than pre-contemplation compared to males. So, and I will note that these gender and sex were the only two variables demographic variables that were significantly different. The other ones, such as faculty role, age, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, disability, etc., were not shown to be significantly different. And so that was interesting to us, especially this one among when we were discussing among team members in the news or and in literature. Historically, younger generations tend to be more involved and connected to social media, social change initiatives. And so that's why we hypothesized younger demographics would be more advanced in EDI related changes. But our results show um, a bit differently, right? So, in fact, both the other two age categories, 34 to 49 and 50 to 65, were skewed more to the right compared to younger individuals. So that was really interesting to see. So, what are our next steps of this project? Well, I would like to conduct an intersectionality analysis by applying this academic wheel of privilege framework to triangulate the demographic data and look at the relationship between the stages of change. And there might be some interesting findings that come from that. I'm in the process of qualitatively analyzing interview transcripts to validate the EDI-Ready survey and identify common experiences, perspectives, and misconceptions among some professionals for the development of games, which is the whole other aspect of this project. And then phase two is we have different partners um, that are working with us on this project, including Perimeter Institute, who has provided us with some funding, and therefore we're now implementing this study at Perimeter Institute come hopefully in June. So we want to apply this to different contexts, into institutions. Hopefully, we can explore this globally as well in the future. So that is the tool, EDI tool in development. And I hope you all, stay in tune with we hope to put up a website soon so that way you can have live updates of what work we're doing and how we're progressing with this. But the second aspect of this presentation is the EDI tools that are currently available to us. And I'm because of this being a Canadian seminar, I thought it would be good to really hone in on the NSERC guidelines, which is in itself a tool. But I really like how they consider EDI considerations in research. And anyone who applies for a grant or a scholarship, including graduate students, need to consider have a statement in their application that considers this. And these are the EDI considerations at each stage of the research process and EDI considerations for research teams. Okay, so they have their own guidelines and resources to help how to go about addressing these questions. But I'm going to share a few tools from Carleton University and some of the work that I've been doing with, green chemistry to consider these questions as well. So, tools for addressing EDI and STEM research and teaching more broadly. I'm going to talk a little bit, emphasis on the middle one, but there's these tools. This is before my time at Carleton, but team members of the Edit STEM team have worked in producing what is called this EDI and Science Teaching Toolkit. So specifically for go about implementing EDI in teaching. The second one being implementing EDI in research. And then this last one, which is not an open available resource, but I do have the link here. I just wanted to highlight how there's a really great work that is being done at Carleton that involves the creation of these collaborative Indigenous learning bundles. So weaving kind of Indigenous knowledge with Western science, and these modules can be implemented directly into a course um, if an instructor at Carleton is interested in that. And so there's some really cool things, and I encourage you to look into that a little bit more. Anyways, this first one, I'm just going to talk a little bit about this one, just because I want to get more into the research one. But this is an open access a resource that includes tools, assignments, materials for embedding EDI in educational interactions and experiences. And it's divided into 6 sections, each addressing different aspects of course design and delivery. So, course outline, there's like tools and an actual template of what what considerations to put in your course outline to make it more inclusive, accessible to students. Additionally, resources and recommendations for your course website, class materials, assignment ideas, in-class activities, and ongoing learning. And so there's a bunch of different links that you can look at in more detail if there's one particular aspect that you're interested in learning how to integrate EDI into. So overall, this tool aims to really provide practical and effective tools for educators to start or continue their journey of integrating EDI in their teaching. The next one is also created by some of the Edit STEM team members. It's the Research Pocket Guide. It's a dynamic reference tool that can be used by anyone engaged in STEM research. It recognizes that advancing EDI and an innovation is an innovation challenge that can be tackled in familiar ways, such as experimenting with new methods, collecting data, adjusting tactics, and learning both from our mistakes and triumphs. The goal of this pocket guide is really to encourage scientists and engineers at every career stage to integrate deliberate, equitable practices in the research. And rather than it being all at once, the guide contains ideas and resources suited for various stages of these adventures. So there's the starter equipment, team assembly, team inclusion, research design, communication, leadership, and traveling. And I'm going to go through just a few of these in a little bit more detail, just so that we can explore what this looks like. So, this first step is the starter equipment, and there's a bunch of awesome resources. This is just one of them that I chose. But most of these resources are geared to building awareness and understanding of EDI topics. Um, this could be completely skipped over if you already have an understanding of these topics, but it's I find even having a background like an understanding of EI topics, I find I learn something new each time. Like, just even looking at this many molehills make a mountain, and just like the analogy of like seeing all the different things of what can contribute to these, you know, discrimination and the impact of bias. So it starts with kind of these really cool infographics. There's another one on intersectionality and allyship, which I also thought are really essential topics, and as they're called, EDI essentials. And it, it's really just gaining this understanding, and they're paired with ask yourself questions such as, have you tried the implicit association test? Are you surprised with your results? Have you considered that many under unconscious biases that or have you considered any unconscious biases that may impact your research as a scientist? So it gets you to think a little bit and reflect, which is great because you can do that individually, and it's not, you can take that time to do that. So now getting into like one of the first sections of the toolkit, fostering inclusion with teams. Like I said, they always start off with um, did you know? So gaining that understanding, and then it's have you considered? And these are the practical strategies, tangible strategies that one could implement. Not all of them. You could choose one, you could choose two. It's just providing with some examples of how you could go about doing this. So one example is creating a lab or team handbook, which could be, between all team members, fostering, and keeping open communication on the expectations of what um, a supervisor might have, but also other things that, graduate students may be experiencing that needs to be addressed in the handbook. Another thing could be organizing regular research team lunches or gatherings, just to build that sense of community and belonging. Asking all group members about individual needs. Again, this is more geared towards faculty, but um, I've just even from the conversations that I've had with other people, just like learning about and addressing needs, such as like flexible work arrangements, communication preferences, cultural, religious holidays, accommodations to that are needed in to work in the workplace. These are good. That's a great idea to have like a conversation with each group member, creating a group schedule for the term and seeking feedback. And then some people have conducted an anonymous survey of your research environment just to really help leaders and faculty members understand team members' perspectives about the research environment and then address issues to improve the team climate and functioning. So the next part of each section of this toolkit is these EDI skill builders. And this one isn't actually one that they've highlighted, but it is part of a resource that they have on the research pocket guide, and I thought it would be great to highlight. So this is called the EDI SWOT. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It's really an assessment a tool for evaluating strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of an organization, group, or project. It can be done in a team meeting, and it's an effective yet simple way for identifying areas for improvement as well as taking opportunities to take advantage of. So, these are just a few questions that one can consider when like implementing this in a team, but um, something a really cool framework to consider. The next one is communicating science research. So again, they start off with a did you know? I found this one particularly useful for this presentation, given the its molecular biology. No, I sorry, I I'm trying to think of the name of the the seminar series. Yeah. But anyway, so it basically says that nearly half of cell biology papers and nearly a quarter of psychology and plant science papers, their images would be completely or partially inaccessible to readers with one form of color blindness. So it's really thinking about what you can do in your presentation to make it more accessible, and so there's things within the presentation itself, but other things could involve including a land acknowledgement, reviewing your presentation for design accessibility. This is one part of it. Explaining idioms if used. So an idiom is just a group of words having a meaning not deducible from individual words. It may not be understood by all, so just providing a brief explanation can support inclusive communication. Using stories and metaphors to help communicate dense science topics to the public is very effective. Um, and including a final slide at the end of presentations with key points and take-home messages can really help um, listeners who might struggle to remember key points um, due to disability or individual differences, or just one's familiar with the topic at hand. And so now we're getting specific into designing and conducting research. This is the more specific type of question that is part of the NSERC guidelines. But there's different things that you can consider when designing and conducting research. First being completing a sex and gender-based analysis training. So that's what the short term means. Um, so that one can be familiar with concepts and processes. There is actually a free training program under the Government of Canada, which I can post in the chat after this presentation. Um, there's other things to consider is including discussion of social factors to the experimental research outcomes when applicable. Considering resources specifically written for how to approach or how to appropriately conduct research that applies to an underrepresented group, including sex and gender separately within your research when applicable, um, because sex and gender are often poorly differentiated and contain many different aspects that greatly impact research. And then also reviewing research projects and methods for appropriate and ethical inclusion of gender. And again, all of these things are just the key points of ways to in implement or strategies for including EDI in research. But each point in the pocket guide also contains specific resources of how to go about doing that, which I think really takes this resource to the next level. And then the last one that's particularly useful for both faculty and graduate students is integrating EDI in mentorship and leadership in research. I've heard this many times that representation matters, and including role models from underrepresented groups can lead to improved performance and heightened interest in STEM. Mentorship has a huge impact on those who pursue STEM. And I hear this in podcasts all the time, and so it's so critical. And I have a really great resource that actually wasn't in the research pocket guide, but something that I think complements it really well. So things that you could do in mentorship and leadership type activities could be involving suggesting alternative speakers to event organizers if the panel lacks diversity, hosting accessible events involving people with diverse lived experiences, expertise, and identities, reflecting on the language you use when speaking with group members about various topics, and creating a more supportive environment for neurodivergent trainees. And this can be paired with that communication aspect of just sitting down and having a conversation with each group member and identifying what their needs are. So this is the tool that I thought would be really beneficial to share. This comes from one of my, uh, there are people at Carleton University that are collaborators on this project, but it's called Lead, a Lifelong Education and Development course. It's accessible, open access to anyone who would like to take it, and it's for highly qualified personnel that addressing kind of like the skills that you might not um, learn when you go through grad school or early career educator or, you know, so mentorship is one of them. And they, in this workbook that they have with the course, they provide this like mentorship plan that you can walk through with the mentor and mentee that define expectations, identifying the needs of both the mentee and mentor, finding ways of how to be accountable, um, different communication styles. It's a really cool template, and I've used this within my own mentor-mentee relationships, and um, I think it's definitely something that um, you know, not a lot of people know about, and this is why I'm sharing it. So feel free to check it out. Okay, now the last part of considering EDI in each stage of the research process, I'm going to come kind of take a little bit more specific viewpoint of conducting chemical, biochemical, biological research in general. A lot of what I'm trying to address here is the problem of environmental injustices are intended and unintended consequences of conducting STEM research, particular chemistry, biochemistry related. And one solution to addressing environmental injustices is applying green chemistry and systems thinking to consider and address environmental justice. Um, and so how do we go about doing that? Well, first, not everyone might know what environmental injustices are, so I'm going to just briefly describe that. So, the opposite of environmental injustice is advocating and working towards environmental justice. And this is when everyone, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, has equal protection against environmental and health risks. Basically, this environmental justice gives us the language for describing who should be considered in chemical and biochemical innovations and who is most affected by damage to the environment. So this happens when everyone has fair access to the decision-making process or processes, is treated equitably in enforcing environmental regulations, has rights to their local natural resources. And so here's just one example of an environmental injustice that sheds light on harmful chemicals and processes. So, for example, The production of ammonium or ammonia is known as um, is a result of Louisiana's Cancer Alley. And so this is where ammonia plants and fertilizer production facilities are concentrated in highly polluted, often low income and marginalized communities, which is known as this Louisiana's Cancer Alley. And these facilities significantly contribute to poor air quality and pose um, substantial risks of toxic chemical spills in areas already bearing the brunt of industrial production. And this region has a 95% higher risk of cancer due to the air pollution than the rest of the country. So this is just one example of how innovations in science can also lead to harm. And these are things that we need to consider when we are creating new chemicals or innovations in science. So, green chemistry is one of the solutions to environmental justice. And as stated by John Warner, who is a green chemistry advocate and pioneer, it is a revolutionary approach to the way that products are made. And it's a science that aims to reduce or eliminate the use and or generation of hazardous substances in the design phase of material development. Um, and so, really, green chemistry, in very simple terms, is just a different way of thinking about how we go about chemical and biochemical innovation. Um, and it's guided, we can engage in green chemistry by these following these 12 principles, also developed by John Warner and Paul Anastas. And these principles guide the design of safer chemicals, efficient syntheses, and the use of suitable feedstocks. They range from the use of safer solvents and renewable raw materials to the development of energy efficient processes and chemicals that can degrade and can be discarded easily. So I'm not going to go into too much more detail about it because it can be its own talk, but um, let me give you just a brief example of how we can put green chemistry in practice. And typically it's by asking how green or wasteful is my reaction? We need um, a quantifiable way to assess impact by measuring baseline. Nothing ever is going to be green, but the way that I've learned from pioneers in this domain, Philip Jessup being one of them, which is what pathway is greener. And so we can look at, a general reaction, and we can do traditional methods for these reactions, such as product yield, conversion, selectivity. But these green chemistry metrics can add to thinking about how we can make something greener, such as looking at material efficiency, safety, environmental impact, and energy. And scientists need to consider all of these things. So, if we think now, okay, what else should we consider? This is where we can think of the life cycle of a chemical reaction. And I am tapping into my chemistry background here, but we can, by doing what else, by considering other things, this is systems thinking in practice, which is what other things do we need to understand based off of um, you know, instead of just safety environment, it's looking at a holistic view of a system, which could be reaction and how it impacts people, the environment, and society. So we could consider, where do the starting materials come from? Are they renewable? What is the environmental impact of the process? What side reactions occur? Are the products safe? Does the product degrade safely? Does the design produce the least waste and where does it go? So this is just a general way of looking at the life cycle from um, the materials and where they start from, or where they come from, to where the product goes, with the waste after it's being produced, to what is the other thing, what are the other considerations when conducting the experiment. And so thinking systematically is a way to tap into all these different components. And so when we use green chemistry and we use systems thinking, we can consider the environment, we can use an environmental justice lens when doing so. For example, we can consider the design and impact. We could ask questions such as, could the use of the chemical reduce harm to communities most vulnerable to pollution? We could ask, are the energy and material demands of this research equitably and commercially sourced? Is the waste safely managed, and is the disposal equitable for nearby communities? Who benefits from this research and who might be left out? And are there local or global perspectives on justice, sustainability, and health included in your research? So these are some things just using systems thinking by considering the you know multiple aspects of how your research may influence these different categories. We can also work towards environmental justice for research. And here's just a few environmental justice resources that I would encourage you all to explore in a little bit more detail if you're interested in learning more about this topic. But they all come from the Green Chemistry for Sustainability website. So the last part of this presentation is really to identify one EDI action. And I know it's not as interactive as what I planned it to be, but what is one item action that you plan to implement in your research and or work environment within the next month? And you can either do this, um, you know, on your own, or feel free to put it in the Mentimeter question. Um, and so, yeah, that's um, the main thing that I want to do, the activity for you all. But just to wrap up here, I know we're kind of almost at time. The key takeaways from this presentation is um, one, there's tools and development, one being a questionnaire that measures STEM professionals' readiness to engage in EDI initiatives. And two, there's EDI tools available to you, such as the EDI in Science Teaching Toolkit, the Research Pocket Guide, and we can use systems thinking and green chemistry practices to address environmental justice within our own research. So if there's time, I'd be happy to take any questions, or you can always reach out to me via email and we can continue this conversation offline. Great.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alicia. So informative. I was actually going to ask if people can reach out to you about any questions they had or
Yeah.
toolkits you can send them outside of what you shared today. So that's perfect. I can definitely include that in a little post-seminar announcement to our members if you're okay with that.
Yeah. Happy.
Um, awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much again. If you do have any questions, feel free to either ask them now. We have about a minute, or feel free to email Alicia directly, and I'm sure she can direct you to some answers there. But are there any questions that anybody would like to ask? Anybody who's stuck around? Yeah, Mustafa.
Hi, thank you, Alisha. This is a great talk, a great work. Thank you. This
Thanks.
is one of the quite important research area that very few people are actually working on this area. And then although everybody is talking about, and then I cannot see a real research that is touching on the problems on the field actually. So thank you for doing this work. I
Thank you.
just wondered, do you can we also access to the questionnaire, or is there anywhere else that we can use? We can translate the questionnaire into different languages and then
I
use
love
into
that.
different contexts.
Yeah, so we are planning to the next step of this after uh analyzing the interviews is to publish this work. So that
Okay.
is aiming, yeah. So we want, and that way the questionnaire would be available to all in the manuscript. And so stay tuned because yes, it will be available. Um,
Okay.
yeah. But right now this like we just finished the study and at Carleton, and so just finishing up a few analyses. But I agree, I think it would be wonderful to have this questionnaire out there and being able to translate that to in different languages to be assessed in different countries.
Yeah, perhaps adapting different countries' needs as well, not just directly
Exactly.
translate, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm,
Modifying. Yeah, 100%.
and the second question is my wife is actually working on these kind of issues, actually the encouraging girls' participation in STEM field.
Yeah, that's great.
But she's mostly interviewing engineering and Faculty of Science students, undergraduate students.
Mm,
Lux is focusing on graduate and then the faculty. So it
mm,
is quite a different perspective. And I just wonder what kind of differences actually we can observe in the graduate students and also the faculty side. It would be quite
right.
interesting to see the results.
Yeah, the differences between graduate responses versus faculty, for sure.
Yeah,
But interestingly, I think we have to dive into the specific questions to really identify ones where there might be that d big difference because overall, when we combine the scores of all questions, right, we see that there is no difference between the stages of change among roles, which is wild, right? You would think that there might be, but I think, yeah, again, I think that's part of the diving into specific items in the questionnaire to see how they were answered differently amongst graduate students and faculty. And then that could also then inform the development of areas or that we need to specifically address for graduate students versus faculty, right? Like that will lead to tailored intervention.
and a final question. I just wonder, did you have any kind of information from the disabled people in the STEM area? I mean, these are the diversities are in
Yeah.
different like cultural diversities, gender diversities, or
Yeah.
some physical or disability diversities. What are the
Yeah.
differences between them in terms of the
So
disabilities?
yeah, so that's a great question. And we did, in fact, ask a question in our demographic questionnaire about if anybody experienced any dis has is ha experienced any disabilities and across the different disability types as well. As for the difference in experiences, we would need to go back, we need to go into the data and see again specific questions. But I also am because I'm analyzing the interview data right now, I'm hoping that that could also pull out some of the experiences that people who identify with disabilities face. So that is also re the reason why we did those interviews to get more of a understanding of those perspectives.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mustafa. Thanks for joining. And yeah, hopefully I'll learn something from this and
Yeah,
happy to chat beyond this.
yeah, that would be very nice. I mean, because I'm still interested